This video is for the rest of 8-2 using the distributive property. So we're going to be working on factoring by grouping and then the zero product property. First thing you need to do is you need to know these rules for when we factor by grouping. So these bullet points need to be written down, and then the symbols are also helpful and important for you. In your binder, you have this page where you have a table that you are able to use, this factoring by grouping table, and then you can fill in those things there. So you can do that. You can pause the video and go ahead and do that. What we're looking at and what we're going to focus on is this. Let me resize the screen for a second. Okay, so when we factor by grouping, what we want to do is we want to look at these terms, and we want to go ahead and group the first and second term and then the last two terms. So if I go ahead and do that, so I have 9x squared plus 6x, I group those, and then I have plus 12x plus 8. And so now that I have those, what I can do is I can go ahead and factor out from each of the separate parentheses. So with the first one, my greatest common factor is going to be 3x. And so I'm left with 3x plus 2. And then on the second one, I'm going to go ahead and factor out a 4. So I factor out a 4, and I'm left with 3x plus 2. So you'll notice now we've got the same factors between the two different terms. So now what I can do is, that's a common factor. So I can factor that out. So I end up with 3x plus 2. And then the other terms that I have that are left are 3x plus 4. And I got those from here and here. So that is factoring by grouping. So now if I move down, so I'm going to move down on this page. So this is number 2, okay? So on number 2, what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and try to do that on your own. All right, so go ahead and pause the video and then try and do that on your own. So hopefully you did pause the video. So here is the solution and how you work that out. Okay, so go ahead and try to do the third one. Pause the video. So this would be the answer that you should have gotten. Sorry for the background noise. This should have been the answer that you should have gotten on that one. So notice on this one, the difference here is that you do just factor out a 1 because you already have a term that is the same in 4x plus 3. But you still have to pull something out when you factor it out. So in this case, it would just be 1. So now when we are factoring this, it's going to be a little different because we have a subtraction when we start our second grouping. So we're going to group here, and then what we got to do here is, because this is a minus, what we're going to do is we're actually going to move a plus sign in here, and then we're going to group that negative with the 4x. Okay, so anytime you have a minus there, you want to put a plus sign and then move that negative. So it's just like you've been doing with combining like terms, and so you're doing the same thing here. So now we factor out, and so we factor out 2. I'm sorry, no, we can't do that. We factor out an x, and we get 2x minus 3. And then here, and finish it, and we get 2x minus 3. Now we have, right, we have greatest common factors between the two. So we end up with 2x minus 3. And then the other pair would be x minus 2, or x plus negative 2, but you end up at the same spot. Okay, so go ahead and take a second and write this next problem down. And pause the video, see if you can work it out, and then in a second it'll pop up and you can see if you got it right. So pause the video now. Okay, so there's our answer to that one. So the key here is when you factor out that negative 10 from this side, you got to make sure then the plus or the minus 10 becomes a plus because you factor that negative out. Okay, so let's go ahead and do one more. So look at number 6 on the bottom there. Go ahead and copy that down, then pause your video, and then the answer will pop up. So here would be the answer to that. And in this case, again, you end up with just taking out negative 1 from the second binomial, and then it allows you to get x plus 2 as a common term, or a common factor, and then you can set it up and get it completely factored. The next step in this lesson is figuring out the zero product property. So the zero product property is just telling you that if you have a times b, and that equals 0, then either a equals 0, b equals 0, or both a and b equals 0. So how we use that is by first factoring out what we can factor out. So in this case, I don't have to group. I can just factor out because they have a common factor. So the greatest common factor here would be 4x. So we factor that out, and we end up with x plus 5, and that equals 0. So now what we're saying is, okay, we have two terms here. We've got a and we've got b. So we're solving, we're saying, okay, so 4x equals 0, or we have x plus 5 equal to 0. So now we just balance the equation we solve, so divide by 4, divide by 4. So in this case, x equals 0. And then in this case, x equals negative 5. So what this is actually allowing us to do is later, this allows us to get what are called the roots of equations. And so it gives us an idea of where a graph is going to pass over or go through or connect with the x-axis. So that's the purpose of this. So let's do a couple more examples. So for these types of problems, you're going to be asked to just solve the equation. So that means you need to figure out what the variable equals. And there may be more than one answer. So in this case, so in this case, we have two separate terms, right? We have two binomials. So we've got 3x plus 6 equal to 0. And then you also do 2x minus 8 equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 6. We get 3x equals negative 6. We divide by 3. And we get x equals negative 2. Over here, we add 8. 2x equals 8. Divide by 2. X equals 4. Okay, so what you then would do is you're now going back and you're saying, okay, if x equals negative 2, is that an actual equation? So you take this and then you substitute it back into the original equation that you had. So we have negative 2, so we do 3 times negative 2 plus 6, and then 2 times negative 2 minus 8 equals 0. So I multiply this out, negative 6 plus 6. Negative 4 minus 8. So I get I get 0 times negative 12. So 0 equals 0. So that checks out. Then you would do the same thing for the other answer we got, which was 4. And it should check out. 0 equals 0, so it's a root of the equation. You may have problems that don't actually equal 0. In this case, you still want to solve so you end up with them equaling 0. So we're going to subtract 3c from both sides. And we end up with c squared minus 3c equals 0. Now we can factor, just like we've been doing. So if we factor out c from both, we get c and then c minus 3. And then we set each of those equal to 0, so c equals 0. And then c minus 3 equals 0. Add 3, c equals 3. So those are the roots of my equation. So that's what you're supposed to be doing on the pages for homework. Give it a shot, and hope this helped. We'll see you on Monday.